Hi, I'm Jay McClellan with Ionia County Search and Rescue and Mount Calm Ionia Citizen Corps. And in this video, I'm going to show you SARTopo or CalTopo Navigation. This is an app that you can run on your phone that allows Incident Command to share an electronic map of the search situation with you and allows you to navigate electronically using the GPS on your phone and this interactive map. It also allows you to, in real time, pass information back to Incident Command about things you may have found or areas that you've covered. So here's an example map that can be created with the SARTopo web service, and this is something that a search planner would do. So during an incident, they can pull up SARTopo, get a map of the area, and then lay out search segments like this, areas that we think we need to cover. And as the search evolves, we can keep building on that. Now, you might be given a printed map like this. And you certainly should be able to use a printed map like this together with a handheld GPS. If you haven't done so already, please take a look at my other video on setting up and using the Garmin handheld GPS, and also the video on the USNG coordinate system, which is what we use with this map. So in this presentation, I'm mainly going to be focused on how to use a smartphone application for navigating for search and rescue, and I'll show you how to install that momentarily, but I want you to understand the trade-offs between the handheld GPS versus a smartphone, because neither one is perfect. The handheld GPS may be more accurate and reliable than the GPS on a smartphone. GPS is what it does. It's designed for that. It may have a larger antenna, better electronics. It may give you a more accurate position fix. That said, smartphone GPS is really not that bad in that regard. A GPS is going to almost certainly have a longer battery life than your phone will, and using GPS navigation on a phone eats batteries. So I'll get into that in a little bit, but you really need to have a backup charging battery with you if you're going to use a phone for navigation like this. GPS handheld units are generally waterproof. Most phones are not. So if you're out in the rain, that's a consideration point for a handheld. Many of them have button controls. Some of them have a touchscreen, but many of them have actual buttons, and those might work better in cold weather. If you're using gloves, for example, you might be able to operate a handheld GPS where you might have to take your gloves off to use a phone. That said, I've done both, and frankly, in cold weather, I usually take my gloves off anyway, regardless of which one I'm using. The other big advantage of a handheld GPS is that it's not your phone, which means you're not using batteries, you're not taking a chance on tying up your main communication device that you may have with you. Now, in our situation, we're not really worried about you getting lost in the wilderness because you're probably with a bunch of other people on a search team. So using your phone really is not that bad, but it's an advantage that a GPS is a second device, and so if it fails, you still have your phone. Advantages for the phone: number one, you've got one. Not everyone has a handheld GPS or a good one, and yes, you can borrow one. The search team may have one available, but it's not going to be familiar necessarily if you don't own your own, you don't spend time with it. A phone can be just a lot simpler for people to use because you've got one and you're familiar with how it works. Phones almost certainly have a better display than a handheld GPS will. The displays on even a really good quality handheld GPS are not all that good compared to most smartphones, so you can see map features better. Really big point: the phone app allows us to give you custom maps that we just created very quickly. You can pull them up on your phone. That's really tough to do on a handheld GPS. It is possible, but it's not straightforward. It's nothing like as simple as it is on a phone. And not only can we give you a map, but it's live, it's real time. So you can add data to the map that everyone else, including Incident Command, can see, and vice versa. Incident Command can define a new search area and it shows up on everyone's map, and they can just tell you over the radio and direct you to it. So phone has a lot of advantages. There's still a place for a GPS, certainly as a backup navigation device. If your phone fails, you should be able to use a GPS and paper map, but phones are a really great alternative. So let's take a look at how to get it set up. To install CalTopo, just install it like you would any other app on your phone. Go out to the App Store, which, the name may be different on iPhone or an Android. I'm using an Android, but iPhone is very similar. Search for CalTopo, and it should come up, and just install it. There's not much more to it than that. And once it's installed, then go ahead and start it up. So once the app starts for the first time, there'll be a question about whether you want to share usage and crash data. That's up to you. Choose either one. But the next question that comes up is very important to make this work. You're asked to choose between a CalTopo or SARTopo server. And this determines the website that the app is going to connect to. And for our purpose, it's very important for you to choose SARTopo, because when we share a map, if you've selected CalTopo to log in, it's not going to work. So select SARTopo at this step and then move on. Next, you need to sign in. And the simplest way to do it is with a Google account. So you probably already have one. Most people do. If not, create one. And that basically establishes your identity, so you can log in to the CalTopo/SARTopo service. This is free, by the way. None of this is going to cost you anything. And for this demo, I'm going to use a Google account with which I've never used CalTopo or SARTopo before, just so you can see kind of the new user experience. So enter your Google account. There'll be a verification step where Google will verify your identity and make sure that you want to allow access to this app, and then go ahead and sign in. So once the application starts up for the first time, the first thing to do is to click the menu bars in the upper left and select Settings. There's not much you need to change here, but you should turn on Allow Cellular Downloads so that map tiles, the images of the maps you're using, can be downloaded while you're out in the field. Otherwise, it would only work over Wi-Fi. It will consume some of your cell phone data plan, but honestly, it's not that much. Unless you're doing some really, really extensive stuff, it's going to be fairly small. Personally, I go in and I increase the limit on map tiles up to the maximum, but that's actually really huge. And for a search and rescue operation, we might download 100 or less map tiles, probably less. So you can go ahead and increase that to the maximum if you want, and then close the settings menu. So next, hit the menu in the upper left again and select Display Options. And in Display Options, I recommend you turn on a grid display. That's up to you, it's optional. But you absolutely must, under coordinates, change the primary coordinate format to USNG, because that's what we use for search and rescue. And also down below, turn on the selection for Show Heading Line, so that when you're navigating, you can get a visual indication of the direction you're pointed. Basically, it lets you use the app as a compass. It's not going to be as accurate as a really good quality handheld compass, but actually, for the way we're going to use it, it's just fine, and it's a lot more convenient. So go ahead and turn that on, and then close this menu. Okay, now that we've got CalTopo configured, let's load up a map. So let's suppose that you have a map provided by Incident Command, a search map. In order to load it up on your phone, it's really easy. All you do is click the menu in the upper left and select Maps. And then in the upper right, you'll see a plus symbol. Just click on the plus, and it'll ask you for a map identifier. And so I'm going to enter for this demo the map identifier Tango 0 Kilo 2. It's not case sensitive, and this map is publicly available. I've shared it out on the server, and so you can enter this. If you've followed along and installed the app, go ahead and do this. Enter Tango 0 Kilo 2, and it should come up right on your phone, the same map. Now, when you load a map that someone has supplied, you might see a scary-looking watermark like this that says a pro account is required. Don't panic. You do not need a paid pro account for any of the basic features that I'm going to cover in this video, and really for anything you need for search and rescue. What happened in this particular example is that the sample map I created, I turned on a layer to show property boundaries so that I could see the boundaries of this park when I created the map. And that particular layer is only available to those with a pro level account, a paid account. It's about $30 a year, although CalTopo will give free accounts to search and rescue members if you submit the right paperwork. So that can be done. But if you see this watermark, it most likely does not mean that there's anything wrong with the basic map. There's just some layer that's been turned on that is restricted. Now, you can just ignore it and it's okay. But let's open up the Layers menu, which is this icon in the upper right, and that'll let you select different map layers. So in this case, I can go in and turn off that property boundary layer to get rid of that watermark. But you can also select different base layers. You can look at the satellite imagery that we're looking at. You could switch to some base map layers that show you things like roads, trails, other features more like a map. You can, there's quite a lot of stuff you can do. I'm not going to go into all the options. Basically, just play with it. You can add an overlay for contour lines. If you want to see contours, elevation contours, you can add that in. So it's very flexible. Usually just the base map you get is going to be okay, but you can fine tune it to your needs. So feel free to open the Layers menu and change that any way you want. Once it's loaded up, it's fully functional. You can scroll around, and this particular map I shared as read-only, and so you can load it up and look, but you can't modify anything. For a search, we can share a map as modifiable so that you can contribute additional resources to it. You can add markers and other things, and I'll show you how to do that. But that's really all it takes to load up a map and start using it. Okay, let's do some actual navigation. For this demo, I created a simple little search map with some rectangular search segments that we might need to traverse. And so to get navigation started, first you're just scrolling around looking at a map, but to actually see where you are, you've got to click the little compass pointer icon in the bottom here. And when you click that, then it activates the GPS and it'll show your current position. And if you've enabled it in the settings, it also shows a heading line. That's basically compass direction that your phone is facing. And as I said before, it may not be super accurate, but it's actually reasonably good for our purposes. Now here's an example you can see of the GPS accuracy. I've marked a staging location on the map, and so we can assume that we would be starting at staging and heading out to our search area. And I'm actually standing on the east, which would be the right-hand side of the road. But you can see the GPS is showing me on the left-hand side of the road. It's kind of showing a circle suggesting how accurate it is, but that's really only an estimate. So just be aware that when it shows your position as a tiny dot, there's an error there introduced by the GPS location, and typically it's good to within 10 meters or so. But if you suddenly seem to be not where you thought you were by a small amount, that may just be GPS error that does fluctuate over time. So the first thing I'll do is just start walking out to my assigned search segment, and for this demo we'll assume that we've been assigned to search segment number 3. And so I can use the compass direction arrow to point my heading approximately toward where I want to go and just start hiking out. In this case, I'm not going to go in a straight line there because I'm hiking along some power lines and it's easier to walk along the power lines. But so even in just this mode, it's pretty useful. You can see where you're going, you can see where you're pointed, you can see where you're at. And so that's really all it takes to navigate around. You can zoom in on the map, take a closer look, and generally get to where you need to be. So I'm just going to hike out to the northwest corner of my assigned search area before I begin my search. Now I need to point out something subtle and very important on this screen. In the upper right, you'll see a coordinate display showing your coordinates in USNG. It's very important to understand those are the coordinates of the crosshairs shown in the center of the screen, not necessarily your current location. They're the crosshairs. You can pan the map around and place those crosshairs on other things to measure coordinates of other things. So if you want to know your current position, there's a pop-up menu in the bottom right, and you pop that up and click on the Keep Centered option, and that will place the crosshairs centered over your current position, and then the position display in the upper right will be where you are. But don't get confused by that. that display is not necessarily where you're located. That display is the center crosshairs on the screen. To record a track of where you've been, click the menu icon in the bottom right and then select Record Track. So this will store the locations you've been as a continuous line. You can enter a name, so instead of the default name, you could enter the name of your team, for example. And you have an option whether to share the track, store the track just to your own account, or also store it into this map, assuming you have writable access to the map. And you should choose the second option because that's going to upload the track to the server and make it visible to Incident Command and to other teams. So you should start recording a track when you actually begin searching. And for this demo, I'm assuming that my search line has been spread out east to west in a 100-meter long line along between these two grid lines. And so I'm playing the role of the right flank of this search line. Right flank would be the west flank in this case. So I'm walking down the western boundary of my assigned search area, and we would assume that the search line is stretched out to the center line, the center grid line of my search area. Ideally, both the left and the right flankers would be recording tracks with this app. And so you ideally would have a recording of both sides of the search line. But at a minimum, at least the team leader should have a recording. And the team leader is not going to be normally on one of the flanks. The team leader would be behind the search line, walking back and forth and trying to keep people on course. But for this demo, I'm playing the role of the right-hand west flank, and so you can see that I'm just walking down south along the grid line. Now, do not expect this to give you a perfectly straight line. That's not life. The GPS is going to fluctuate around, and of course, I'm walking through woods. There's stuff in the way. You're going to have to, go around things. That's perfectly fine. It's, realistically, I'm staying along my assigned line, probably within 10 meters, maybe a little better than that. So I'm within sight distance. I'm not going to miss anything. This is not a substitute for flagging tape. So as you're searching, the flankers still should be marking a boundary flag with 2 wraps of tape when you start a search at a search boundary, so at the northern edge. And then as you're going, periodically, maybe every 100 meters or so, you should mark a single wrap of flag tape to mark the flank locations. Suppose we're searching and we find something that might be a clue, let's say an article of clothing that may have been dropped. We want to store a marker at the location of any such items so that Incident Command knows about it and we have a record of the location. And so to store a marker at the current GPS location, click the menu dots in the lower right and select Marker at GPS. That will open up a dialog that lets you enter information about the marker you want to store. You can give it a different label if you want, and or just leave it at the date and time. And then you can also enter comments as long as you want about what the marker is, what it means. Once you store the marker, when you hit close, you may find the display is a little confusing if you're recording a track also, because it kind of piles the label of your track right on top of the label of the marker. It's no big deal. Just kind of be aware of that if it suddenly looks weird where it's like it's displaying 2 pieces of text right on top of each other, that's just how it works. And once you scroll around or walk away from that location, then they'll be separated and it won't be a problem. So this will store a marker. You just accept it and it'll store a marker at this location and make it visible to Incident Command. But write it down with paper. Do not rely on technology to store this location as the only place it's recorded. Write down the GPS coordinates, write down the USNG coordinates of what you have found, write down notes about what you have found. That is the primary record of finding an item of interest, and you can always refer to that. But for convenience, store it as a marker, relay that back to Incident Command over the radio to make sure that they receive it and they know it's there. So don't just rely on this technology to alert them that you found something. Use normal procedures to alert Incident Command. Also mark the location of the possible clue with flagging tape. 3 wraps of tape to mark anything of interest, a hazard, a clue, anything that someone would need to be alerted to. Again, don't rely just on technology to make this information visible. Also use flagging tape, old school, and that way if someone is hiking out, maybe their GPS fails, they can still find it. So when you're navigating with an app like this, or with a compass for that matter, a good practice is to use the bearing line or the compass to sight along your direction of travel, your desired direction of travel, toward a distant object like a tree, something that stands out that you can recognize, maybe 50 meters away. It could be much farther in open country during the day or much closer in the woods at night. But sight toward the object, find an object that's going to be your next destination, and then stop looking at the app, stop looking at the compass, look at that object and look around as you're walking. Walk to that destination, then look back at your navigation aid, check it again, and find your next destination. Don't just walk through the woods staring at your phone or staring at your compass for that matter. You're searching. You're supposed to be looking around. So as much as this video is focusing on using the app, keep in mind that when you're searching, you shouldn't be staring at this thing all the time. Use it to get a position fix, use it to get a direction, a bearing to walk to, find the destination object you can walk to, but then walk and look around and search. So for this demo, I'm playing the role of the west flank, and let's say we've reached the southern boundary of our search area. I didn't go all the way to the bottom of the area I marked. I just went part way, but let's just pretend that we've reached the southern boundary of the search area. And remember that our search line has stretched 100 meters wide, so I've covered the western half of my search area at this point. And now we want the team to swing back around and move back to the north to cover the other half. So a good technique is just to shift the entire team straight east by 100 meters. So at this point, we instruct everyone to turn straight east and walk single file 100 meters. Now, the west flank, which would be me, should arrive at a boundary marker that the east flanker has tied, flagging tape. And so I should know when to stop anyway. Now, I've got a GPS, so I can double check that. And then the east flank should have a navigation aid and should be able to tell when they've reached the next grid line of our search area. And then we just make sure everyone is spaced approximately evenly in between, and everyone turns north, and then we just do the same thing working back toward the north. Now at this point I've got a navigation aid so I can follow this grid line if I want to, but I really should be looking for the flagging tape tied on by the flanker, what was the east flanker, as we went south. And so now as I'm going north, I'm still recording a track. I'm still using the app, but primarily I'm going to be navigating with the flagging tape that's been laid down. And we just do the same thing. We walk all the way back to the north boundary of our search area. And then when we reach the boundary marker flags and double check it with the GPS to know that we've reached the northern boundary, then we've covered it and we're done. Now this is very, very important, so don't forget this, please. When you stop searching an area, when we've covered this segment and we're going to stop and maybe go somewhere else or maybe quit, whatever it is, but we're done with this activity, do not forget to open up the menu and stop the current track. Don't just keep recording a track because it'll just, wander off into wherever you're headed next. Maybe you're going to get lunch. So don't forget to stop recording the track and to save it. So you've saved the track, and that essentially publishes it out to Incident Command, publishes it to other teams, records it for posterity. So once again, don't forget that. When you stop recording a track. You can also do that just in the middle of a search. If you need to stop and take a break, you can stop a track and start a new one if you want to. But primarily when you're done searching a segment, stop recording that track and then start a new one when you start searching a new segment. So to wrap this up, We've gone over the trade-offs of handheld GPS versus smartphone, and obviously this video is about the advantages of using a smartphone. And we showed you how to install the CalTopo app onto your phone and set it up for using with search and rescue. I showed you how to load a map from Incident Command, just given the map identifier. You can load it up very easily. I showed you how to navigate using the CalTopo app as a simple navigator, where you can always see where you are on the map. Showed you how to cover an assigned search area while recording a track that records what portions of the area you've covered. And I showed you how to mark points of interest of potential clues or other things you may have found. Also possibly things, areas you couldn't search, other things that might be points of interest along the way. So I hope you found this video useful. By all means, install the CalTopo app, try loading up my sample map, and take it outside and try it out so you're familiar with the app, and be prepared to use it in an actual search. And thanks for watching.